In the attic of an old Victorian mansion, untouched for decades, there lay a forgotten trunk covered in dust and cobwebs. Inside, among moth-eaten clothes and yellowed letters, was a doll, a relic of another era. Her porcelain face was delicately painted with rosy cheeks and a serene smile that seemed frozen in time. Her eyes, however, were the most unsettling feature. Large and glassy, they seemed to watch anyone who dared to gaze upon her. The doll had once belonged to a young girl named Emily, who lived in the mansion with her family in the late 1800s. Emily adored the doll, named Charlotte, and treated her like a cherished friend. But tragedy struck when Emily fell ill with a mysterious fever and passed away at a tender age. Distraught over the loss of their daughter, Emily's parents sealed away her belongings, including Charlotte the doll, in the attic where they gathered dust and memories. Years passed, and the mansion changed hands many times. Each new family that moved in would hear whispers in the night, soft, melodic voices that seemed to come from the attic. They dismissed it as the wind or the creaks of an old house settling, but the whispers persisted. One stormy night, the Peterson family moved into the mansion. John and Sarah Peterson, along with their young daughter Emma, were captivated by the grandeur of their new home. But Emma, exploring the attic out of curiosity, discovered the trunk and opened it to find Charlotte the doll. From the moment Emma laid eyes on Charlotte, strange things began to happen. At first, it was subtle, the sound of tiny footsteps echoing in empty hallways, doors opening and closing on their own, and a feeling of being watched when no one else was around. Emma insisted that Charlotte was responsible, claiming she saw the doll move on its own and heard it whispering to her at night. John and Sarah dismissed their daughter's claims as childish imagination, but as weeks passed, they too began to experience inexplicable occurrences. Objects would vanish only to reappear in strange places, and the air in the mansion grew heavy with an unseen presence. One night, Sarah woke to find Charlotte sitting at the foot of their bed, her glassy eyes staring into hers. The room was icy cold, and Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She tried to wake John, but he remained in a deep, unnatural sleep. Charlotte's lips seemed to move, forming words Sarah couldn't hear, but she felt their weight in the air. Desperate, Sarah sought the help of a local historian who revealed the tragic history of Emily and Charlotte. He warned that the doll was a vessel for Emily's restless spirit, trapped between worlds and seeking solace. Determined to free their home from the haunting, John and Sarah performed a ritual to release Emily's spirit from the doll's grasp. As they lit candles and spoke ancient words of protection, the atmosphere in the mansion shifted. A gust of wind swept through the attic, carrying with it a soft, sorrowful sigh. When the ritual was complete, the mansion fell silent. The whispers ceased, and the oppressive presence that had haunted them lifted. Charlotte the doll remained in the attic, but her eyes no longer gleamed with an otherworldly light. Years later, the mansion still stands, its attic locked and untouched. Locals speak in hushed tones of the haunted doll that once roamed its halls, a testament to the lingering power of love and loss that transcends even death. And Charlotte? She sits in her trunk, her porcelain face serene once more, a silent witness to the secrets of the mansion and the souls that wander its halls. The Whispering Doll. In a small town nestled deep in the woods, there lived an elderly woman named Mrs. Matheson. She was known as a recluse, rarely seen outside her dilapidated cottage except on one peculiar occasion each year, Halloween night. Legend had it that Mrs. Matheson possessed a doll unlike any other. It was said to be crafted from porcelain, with glassy eyes that seemed to follow you wherever you went. The doll had been a gift from her late husband, a master toy maker, and Mrs. Matheson cherished it dearly despite its unsettling appearance. Every Halloween, the children of the town dared each other to approach Mrs. Matheson's cottage and catch a glimpse of the mysterious doll. They spoke in hushed tones about the strange sounds emanating from the cottage, whispers that carried on the wind like ghostly echoes. One fateful Halloween night, a brave young boy named Tommy decided to prove his courage. Armed with a flashlight and bolstered by the bravado of his friends, he approached the cottage's creaking porch steps. The air grew colder as he knocked on the weathered door, each tap echoing in the stillness of the night. After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open slowly, revealing Mrs. Matheson standing in the dimly lit foyer. Her eyes, milky with age, fixated on Tommy with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "I've come to see the doll," Tommy blurted out, trying to sound brave despite the tremor in his voice. Mrs. Matheson's expression softened slightly, and she nodded, beckoning him inside. Reluctantly, Tommy stepped over the threshold, his heart pounding in his chest. The cottage was filled with shadows that seemed to dance and flicker in the dim candlelight. In the corner of the room, atop a dusty shelf, sat the doll. Its porcelain face glimmered faintly, catching the light from the candles. Tommy approached it cautiously, feeling an inexplicable sense of unease wash over him. He reached out to touch the doll's delicate lace dress, but as his fingers brushed against the cold porcelain, he heard it, a soft, eerie whisper, barely audible yet unmistakably there. Startled, Tommy turned to Mrs. Matheson, who watched him with a knowing look. "The doll speaks to those who dare to listen," she murmured cryptically. Suddenly, a gust of wind rattled the windows, extinguishing the candles in an instant. Darkness enveloped the room, and Tommy felt a cold hand grip his shoulder. Panic surged through him as he stumbled backward, tripping over a chair and crashing to the floor. In the darkness, he heard the doll's whispers grow louder, filling his mind with chilling words that seemed to echo from another realm. The air around him felt heavy and oppressive, suffused with an ancient presence that sent shivers down his spine. With a burst of courage fueled by sheer terror, Tommy scrambled to his feet and bolted for the door. He burst outside into the cool night air, the echoes of the doll's whispers fading behind him. From that night onward, Tommy never spoke of what he experienced in Mrs. Matheson's cottage, but in the quiet moments before sleep, he could still hear the faint whispers of the doll, a reminder of the thin veil that separates the living from the realm of the unknown. And Mrs. Matheson? She continued to live in her cottage, with the whispers of the doll as her only companions in the long, dark nights. The Cursed Doll. In a quaint village in Eastern Europe, there was a small, ancient shop known for selling antiques and oddities. The shop was owned by an elderly woman named Madame Zorka, who was rumored to be a witch. Among the dusty shelves filled with strange artifacts, there was one item that stood out, a beautifully crafted doll with a face of porcelain and eyes that seemed almost alive. This was no ordinary doll. It was said to be cursed. The doll had a dark history. It was created in the 1800s by a master craftsman who was deeply in love with a woman named Eliza. When Eliza tragically died in a fire, the craftsman poured his grief and sorrow into the doll, believing that part of her soul had imbued the doll with life. Soon after, the craftsman himself disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and the doll was passed down through generations, bringing misfortune and death to its owners. One fateful day, a young girl named Sophia and her mother visited Madame Zorka's shop. Sophia was immediately drawn to the doll, mesmerized by its lifelike appearance. Despite Madame Zorka's warnings, Sophia's mother purchased the doll for her daughter, believing it to be an innocent toy. From the moment the doll entered their home, strange things began to happen. At night, Sophia's mother would hear soft footsteps and faint whispers emanating from Sophia's room. She dismissed them as the creaks of an old house, but the disturbances grew more frequent and intense. Objects moved on their own, and eerie shadows flickered on the walls. One night, Sophia woke her mother, claiming that the doll was talking to her. Sophia's mother, though skeptical, decided to investigate. She tiptoed into Sophia's room and found the doll sitting upright on the bed, its eyes gleaming in the moonlight. She felt an unnatural chill in the air and a sense of being watched. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Sophia's mother consulted the village historian, who revealed the doll's cursed past. Alarmed, she returned home to find Sophia sitting in a trance, the doll clutched tightly in her arms. Sophia's eyes were vacant, and she spoke in a voice not her own, recounting events from Eliza's life that Sophia couldn't possibly know. Realizing the danger, Sophia's mother sought the help of a priest to exorcise the doll. The priest arrived and began to perform a ritual to cleanse the house and free Sophia from the doll's grip. As he chanted prayers, the doll's expression seemed to change, its serene face twisting into a malicious grin. The room grew colder, and the lights flickered violently. With a final, desperate plea, the priest cast the doll into the fireplace. The flames roared as if fueled by an unseen force, and a piercing scream echoed through the house. The doll's porcelain face cracked and blackened as it burned, and the oppressive presence lifted from the room. After the ordeal, Sophia slowly returned to her normal self, with no recollection of the events that had transpired. Her mother, though relieved, could never forget the haunting experience. They moved away from the village, hoping to leave the cursed past behind. The charred remains of the doll were buried in the village cemetery, sealed in a box with holy symbols to prevent its curse from spreading. Madame Zorka's shop remained closed, its doors forever shut, and the village resumed its quiet life, wary of the dark secrets that still lingered in the shadows. To this day, villagers speak in hushed tones about the cursed doll, warning children to beware of things that may seem innocent but hide sinister truths. And though the doll is gone, the legend of its malevolence endures, a chilling reminder of the thin veil between this world and the next. The Dollmaker's Revenge. In a small, picturesque town nestled between rolling hills, there was a modest toy shop that had been in business for generations. It was owned by a kind and elderly man named Mr. Whitaker, known to everyone as the town's dollmaker. His dolls were exquisite, each one meticulously crafted with lifelike features and elaborate clothing. Among his collection, there was one doll that stood out, a beautiful yet eerie doll named Annabelle. Annabelle had a porcelain face with delicate features, her eyes a deep, almost hypnotic blue. She wore a vintage lace dress, and her presence in the shop always drew attention. However, there was something unsettling about her. Mr. Whitaker never sold Annabelle, claiming she was special and meant to stay with him. The townsfolk respected his wishes, but were often unnerved by the doll's seemingly watchful gaze. Years passed, and Mr. Whitaker grew older and frilier. One stormy night, he passed away in his sleep, leaving the shop and its contents to his granddaughter, Lily. Lily, a bright and curious young woman, moved into the old shop, determined to continue her grandfather's legacy. She loved the dolls and spent hours arranging them, but Annabelle always gave her an uneasy feeling. One evening, as Lily was closing up the shop, she noticed Annabelle had moved. The doll, which was usually seated on a high shelf, was now on the workbench, facing the door. Lily, thinking she had forgotten moving the doll, placed Annabelle back on the shelf and locked up for the night. That night, Lily was awoken by the sound of soft footsteps and faint whispering. She got up and searched the house, but found nothing. The following morning, she discovered Annabelle had moved again, this time to the living room. Disturbed but rationalizing it as a sleepwalking episode, Lily returned Annabelle to the shop. Over the next few days, the strange occurrences escalated. Lily heard eerie giggles, felt cold drafts, and saw shadows flit across the corners of her vision. The doll seemed to be following her, appearing in different rooms despite her efforts to keep it locked in the shop. Desperate for answers, Lily sought out Mrs. Thornton, the town historian and a close friend of her grandfather. Mrs. Thornton revealed a chilling secret. Annabelle was the first doll Mr. Whitaker had ever made, intended as a gift for his beloved wife, who had died tragically in a car accident. Overcome with grief, Mr. Whittaker poured all his sorrow and longing into creating Annabel, inadvertently binding a part of his soul to the doll. Lily, determined to free herself from Annabel's haunting presence, decided to perform a ritual to release her grandfather's spirit. Following Mrs. Thornton's guidance, she gathered the necessary items: a white candle, sage, and a locket that had belonged to her grandmother. That night, as the storm raged outside, Lily placed Annabel in the center of the room and lit the candle. She began to burn the sage, chanting the words Mrs. Thornton had given her. The atmosphere in the room grew tense, and the air thickened with an unseen presence. Annabel's eyes seemed to glow with an otherworldly light, and Lily felt a cold hand grip her shoulder. Ignoring her fear, Lily continued the ritual, holding the locket tightly. The room grew colder, and the shadows around Annabel seemed to dance menacingly. With a final, desperate plea, Lily called out to her grandfather, asking him to find peace and let go. Suddenly, the candle flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. The whispers ceased, and a profound silence fell over the house. When Lily relit the candle, she saw that Annabel's face had changed, no longer eerie, but serene, almost peaceful. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and Lily felt a wave of relief wash over her. She knew her grandfather's spirit had found peace at last. She carefully placed Annabel back on the shelf, feeling a sense of closure. From that night on, the strange occurrences stopped. The shop returned to its quiet, charming self, and Lily continued her grandfather's legacy with renewed passion. Annabel remained in the shop, a silent guardian of the past, no longer a source of fear but a reminder of the enduring power of love and memory. The townsfolk, though still wary, no longer felt the same unease around Annabel. The legend of the haunted doll slowly faded, replaced by tales of the talented doll-maker and his loving granddaughter, who together overcame the shadows of the past.